welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. There is no room for the weak in this world. Later, Tila tries to comfort Adam, but their conversation is cut short when they notice a strange glow coming from the sorceress at Castle Grayskull. Before they can figure out what's happening, the sky fills with massive enemy ships. Within seconds, Eternos comes under attack as explosions tear through the city from above. Duncan quickly sends the army into action as enemy forces close in near the palace. Among the royal defenders are several elite fighters known as the Heroic Warriors. Ram Man crashes into enemies with devastating force. Using his head, Meshanik stretches his neck high above the battlefield to strike down multiple attackers, and Fisto smashes through opponents with the crushing power of his metal hand. As chaos spreads through the streets, Duncan guides Tila and the royal family through the war zone. The guards protecting them fall one by one, but Duncan proves exactly why he's one of Eternia's greatest warriors, holding his ground and fighting off several enemies at once even while surrounded. Inside one of the palace corridors, the group runs into the deadly Trapjaw. Knowing how dangerous he is, Duncan tells the others to keep moving and leave him behind. The two warriors clash with incredible force, trading heavy blows and refusing to give each other any space or mercy. As the duel grows more violent, Tila quietly sneaks back to watch from a distance. Duncan eventually lands a stab on Trapjaw and starts to overpower him, but Trapjaw suddenly transforms his mechanical arm into a cannon and fires at Duncan. He then plants an explosive device against the wall and walks away. Tila immediately rushes to her wounded father and drags him toward the nearest window. With only seconds left, they leap out just before the bomb detonates, blasting the corridor apart behind them. Meanwhile, on the bridge leading to Castle Grayskull, the royal family is trapped by enemy soldiers. Their leader, the terrifying Skeletor, steps forward. Randa quickly sends his family away, then draws his sword and charges into battle alone. For a short time, the king fights with impressive power, cutting down several attackers at once, but the enemy numbers are simply too great. Eventually Randa is overpowered and taken prisoner. Skeletor then turns his magic on Randa's statue and destroys it, making it clear that the old rule of Eternia has fallen. He takes the crown for himself and declares that a new power now controls the kingdom. Inside Castle Grayskull, the sorceress urgently has Adam take hold of the Sword of Power. She tells him he must carry it far away, somewhere Skeletor can't reach it. Marina says there's one place no one will think to search for him: her home planet. With no time left, the sorceress opens a portal to Earth. Skeletor enters the castle with his soldiers just as Adam is about to leave. Marina steps in front of her son to protect him, but Skeletor strikes her with magic. The sorceress tells Adam to run, then creates a magical shield to block Skeletor's next attack. As she transforms into a bird and escapes, Adam is pulled through the portal. The raw force of the journey tears the sword from his grasp, and moments later he crashes into a lake on Earth. 15 years pass in Oklahoma. Adam is now a grown man who has just finished telling this entire story to a girl on a date. Unfortunately for him, she doesn't look amazed or inspired. She looks disturbed. To her, the whole thing sounds completely insane, so she gets up and leaves. When Adam gets home, his roommate Hassan tells him he really needs to stop telling people that story. Hassan suggests he should just say he lost his parents in some terrible childhood incident and that his brain buried the trauma under an elaborate fantasy. From the way he says it, it's clear Hassan doesn't believe Adam's version of events either. But Adam refuses to let go of the truth. No matter how strange it sounds to everyone else, he knows who he is. In his room, Adam looks at an old school drawing he made of Randman. A flashback reveals that as a child he once presented that drawing to his classmates as if it were part of real history, and the whole class laughed at him, and even his teacher scolded him for it. Back in the present, Adam opens a box full of drawings he's made over the years, pictures of Etania, his family, and the people he lost. These sketches are his way of holding on to the life that was taken from him. The next day, Adam heads to his painfully dull job at a human resources office, a workplace obsessed with cheerful behavior, forced positivity, and avoiding conflict at all costs. Whenever he gets the chance, he secretly uses his office computer to search online for any clue about the missing sword. Eventually his boss catches him and loses patience, scolding him for ignoring his responsibilities and warning him that if he doesn't stop obsessing over swords, he'll lose his job. Adam barely registers the warning, because at that exact moment he gets a message from someone claiming to have a sword. Without wasting time, Adam rushes to the address the man sends him. It leads him to a comic book store, where he's stunned to find the Sword of Power mounted on a display statue and treated like some fantasy collectible. He tries to pull it free, but the sword won't budge. Instead, the whole statue tips over and crashes down on him. A nearby customer starts recording the embarrassing scene as Adam struggles under the statue, desperately trying to wrench the blade loose. After a long, awkward fight, he finally manages to pull it free. Adam raises the sword and speaks the ancient magic words, expecting the power to return. Nothing happens. Confused and disappointed, Adam grabs the sword anyway and runs out of the store, ignoring the clerk shouting that the item isn't for sale. Adam is so thrilled to have the sword back that he can barely control himself or his driving, smashing into several things along the way as he speeds home, completely lost in the excitement of the moment. Once home, he starts pleading with the sword, begging it to wake up, activate, glow, transform, anything. But no matter what he says or does, the blade stays silent. The next morning, Adam's peace is shattered when two police officers burst into his room. They arrest him for stealing the sword from the comic book store and haul him away. While they're driving him to the station, the police car gets caught in heavy traffic. At first it looks like an ordinary jam, but then people start sprinting through the streets in terror. Adam looks out and realizes something impossible has followed him to Earth. Beastman is attacking the city. The creature spots Adam almost immediately and leaps onto the police car with terrifying force, tearing the door clean off and leaving everyone inside in shock. Adam reacts fast, grabs the Sword of Power, and smashes through a window to escape. He runs onto the highway with Beastman tearing after him through everything in its path. The chase quickly turns brutal. Beastman knocks Adam down by hurling a stack of food boxes at him, then lifts him and throws him hard against a truck. The impact sends the sword flying out of Adam's hand. Just as Beastman moves in to finish him off, a blast suddenly strikes the creature in the chest. A woman storms into the fight, hitting Beastman with quick, precise strikes from her weapon again and again before firing another shot powerful enough to knock the monster off the highway. When she turns toward Adam and says his name, he finally recognizes her. It's Teela. Their reunion barely lasts a second before Beastman comes crashing back, tackling Teela to the ground. She fights it off using a car door as a shield and shoving it away. Teela then grabs the sword and pulls Adam into hiding while Beastman searches through the traffic, shoving cars aside as it hunts for them. She quickly explains that the sword released a signal. That's how she found Adam, but it's also how Beastman tracked him down. With no time to waste, the two make a run for it. Teela leaps smoothly off the highway like she's done it 1,000 times. Adam's landing is far less graceful, and he nearly gets flattened by passing traffic. Beastman catches up again only to get slammed by a speeding truck. Adam and Teela keep moving until they reach a park where Teela's ship is waiting in the open, A crowd gathered around it and staring in disbelief. They rush inside and seal the door just before Beastman can force its way in. When the creature clings to the outside of the ship, Teela activates a portal and the sudden pull throws Beastman loose. During the journey, Teela tells Adam this isn't the world he remembers. Everything has changed, and nobody knows what became of his parents after the invasion. When they finally arrive, Adam is crushed by what he sees. Aeternos, once the shining capital of his home, has been reduced to ruins. Neither Adam nor Teela notices that Triclops is watching them from a distance. Meanwhile, deep inside the fortress of Snake Mountain, Skeletor is furious. Beastman has returned without the sword, and Skeletor punishes him by burning him with magic from his staff. Evil Lyn tells Skeletor the sword is back on Eternia, so he orders Beastman to go after it again. Evil Lyn questions why he's so desperate. From her point of view, Skeletor has already taken the kingdom. He has power, control, and everything he fought for. But Skeletor isn't satisfied. Fearful that everything he's stolen could still be taken from him, he grabs Evil Lyn's arm and burns her too, reminding her that the sword is the only thing that can turn him into a god. A little later, Teela's ship descends into a hidden underground base where the surviving Eternians have been living in secret. But because Triclops followed them, the enemy now knows where the rebels are hiding. Teela brings Adam before the heroic warriors, but they don't believe this awkward stranger is really their lost prince. Adam tries to prove himself by showing them his business card, which does nothing to help his case. Instead of trusting him, the warriors take the sword and lock both Adam and Teela in a cell. Inside, they find a drunk man sleeping nearby, along with Roboto, a Class 4 robot supposedly built with the strength of 20 soldiers. Suddenly the hidden base comes under attack as enemy ships blast through it. From above, Teela hears people screaming and desperately tries to break the cell door down, but it won't budge. Adam turns to Roboto for help, and the robot simply walks forward and, without even trying, rips the door apart. Before they leave, Teela wakes the drunk man, revealing that he is actually Duncan by throwing water in his face. His first reaction is to vomit all over Adam's shoes. Clearly broken and defeated, he refuses to go with them, so Roboto just picks him up and carries him out. The group races through the underground market as explosions tear through the base around them. Then Skeletor makes his entrance, turning the attack into total chaos. When Ram Man is knocked down mid-battle, he quickly hands the sword back to Adam before charging back into the fight. The team dodges blasts from every direction as they search for a way out, eventually finding a cave passage. Teela slides down smoothly with perfect control while Adam, Duncan, and the others follow in a far messier fashion. They hide behind a stack of boxes and watch Trapjaw arrive with more soldiers. Seeing Trapjaw again instantly shakes Duncan, who's clearly still rattled from their last fight. Adam, however, steps forward and tries something different. Using the same calm conflict resolution approach he uses at his office job, he attempts to talk things out peacefully. Trapjaw, unsurprisingly, has no interest in workplace-style negotiation. He immediately attacks, forcing Adam backward toward the edge of a bridge. Adam manages to dodge several strikes and even tries to tackle him, but Trapjaw throws him off with almost no effort. Teela shouts for Adam to use the sword. When he grabs the handle, he suddenly sees a vision of the sorceress telling him to speak the words. This time, Adam pulls the sword free and calls out, "By the power of Grayskull, I have the power." A bolt of magic crashes into the blade, sending a shockwave through the area and knocking the enemy soldiers off their feet. The power of Grayskull surges through Adam, transforming him into its champion. But the grand moment is cut short when Trapjaw tackles him and knocks the sword away. A new fight begins, only now Adam is not the helpless man he was moments ago. He blocks Trapjaw's attacks with ease and stands firm no matter how hard the villain strikes. When Adam punches back, he realizes it still hurts his hand, but his armor and bracelets protect him from Trapjaw's gunfire. Using that opening, Adam grabs Trapjaw's mechanical arm and tears it right off. Now armed with Trapjaw's own weapon, he turns it against the enemy troops and blasts them down one by one. After the fight, the group recovers the sword and escapes aboard Teela's ship. Skeletor watches them leave in a rage, screaming at his men for failing him again and ordering them to chase the heroes down. Soon an enemy fleet is racing after Teela's ship, laser fire hitting them again and again. Teela takes the ship higher into the sky to gain more room to maneuver, but another blast tears into the hull. The breach makes things even worse when one of the enemy ships attacks the cockpit with a massive spinning saw. Teela sends Adam to the back of the ship, where he finds an air bike. He has no idea how to ride it at first and nearly crashes while figuring out the controls, but after a few shaky moments he manages to launch into the air, drawing the enemy's attention and making them chase him instead. While Adam distracts the enemy ships outside, Teela uses one of her ship's wings to slam into an attacker, cutting into its cockpit and finally clearing the immediate threat. But the relief doesn't last as the hull breach is too severe, and Teela's ship starts losing altitude fast. At the same time, Adam's air bike takes a direct hit, and once again he barely knows how to control it. The bike flips over, and he only avoids falling by clinging to it with all his strength. He tries to steer toward a tree to grab onto and break away, but the damaged bike keeps dragging him through the air. With no clean escape left, Adam turns the bike itself into a weapon, sending it crashing into the enemy soldiers and blowing them away in a burst of fire before jumping off at the last second. Instead of landing safely, Adam comes down hard on top of an enemy aircraft. He smashes through the front window, throws the pilot out, and takes control of the ship himself. Back on Teela's damaged vessel, Duncan rushes to the rear section and grabs a laser gun, ready to fire at the pursuing ships. Just as he lines up his shot, Adam accidentally flies directly between Duncan and the enemy. Duncan tries to warn him to move, but Adam can't hear him. Over the chaos, a soldier rams Adam's stolen ship from behind, forcing him to leap out before it goes down. He lands on Teela's ship just in time as the enemy aircraft charges straight at him. Adam doesn't run instead he catches the spinning saw with his bare hands, stops it completely, and hurls the enemy ship into another one, destroying both in a massive explosion. But Teela's ship is still falling. As it drops faster and faster, Adam jumps off and crashes through the branches of a tree. Elsewhere in the forest, Teela's ship hits the ground and skids to a violent stop. Meanwhile, Skeletor has taken over the survivors' hidden base. He threatens the prisoners, demanding to know who the champion of Grayskull really is. At first none of them say a word, and their silence only makes him crueler. Skeletor fires a beam of magic and executes one of the heroic warriors in front of everyone. When he prepares to kill another, Fisto finally breaks and reveals the truth. The champion is Prince Adam. Skeletor immediately orders his soldiers to imprison all the survivors. Out in the forest, Teela tells Duncan to stay with the crashed ship while she searches for Adam. While waiting, Duncan notices a box marked as belonging to his father. Curious, he opens it and finds his old armor inside. Elsewhere among the trees, Adam wakes up and hears the sorceress's voice calling to him, telling him he must restore peace to Eternia. His sword lies nearby with a bird perched on it, but when he reaches for it, the bird flies away. Moments later Teela finds him and brings him back to the crash site, where they discover Duncan wearing his old armor again and shaving, looking almost like the warrior he used to be. For a brief moment Teela seems genuinely proud of him, but then he pulls out a flask, ruining the moment completely. Teela scolds him in frustration and walks away. Duncan turns to Adam and offers an important reminder: a true warrior doesn't fight for fame or glory, he fights because people need protecting. When Teela needs to recover some supplies from the damaged ship, Adam lifts the entire vessel with one hand so she can get what she needs. In the quiet moment that follows, The two admit they missed each other over the years. Adam moves closer, thinking the moment might turn romantic, but Tila gently calls him a good friend and steps back, leaving him awkwardly disappointed. Not long after, Skeletor's image appears across the sky like a giant warning. He announces that if Adam brings him the Sword of Power, he'll release Adam's parents, who have apparently been alive all these years. But if Adam refuses, Skeletor promises to kill them. Tila immediately says it has to be a trap, and she's almost certainly right. But Adam can't ignore the chance that his parents are still alive. He decides he's going to save them and kill Skeletor. After a brief argument, the others agree they won't let him go alone. As the group sets out, the same bird quietly follows behind them. When they reach the fortress, Goatman, the gatekeeper, demands that Adam hand over the sword. Adam refuses, saying Skeletor is the only person he'll give it to. Evil Lyn orders Goatman to take Adam to Skeletor while she deals with the rest of the group herself. Inside the fortress, Adam finds Skeletor and prepares to strike him from behind, but Skeletor steps aside at the last moment, revealing Randa standing there. Seeing his father alive shocks Adam. Randa asks him for the sword, but Adam refuses to hand it over. Skeletor then summons his elite warriors, and Adam doesn't hesitate. He launches into battle against all of them at once, finally showing the full force of his new power. When one enemy knocks the sword from his hand, Adam grabs another soldier and uses him like a weapon to smash through the rest, even turning one of the spine-covered monstrous fighters against his own allies. Once Adam gets the sword back, their warriors surround him from every side, but he rises with a blast of energy that sends them flying backward. The battle rages on, and no matter what strange power-outwisted ability the attackers throw at him, Adam keeps adapting and fighting through them. Randa watches from nearby, and for the first time he truly looks proud of his son. Then Goatman charges in desperately with his axe, driving Adam back onto the bridge above the volcano. The fight turns dangerous, but Adam breaks Goatman's horns and punches him hard enough to send him falling into the lava below. With Skeletor's warriors finally defeated, Adam turns his attention to Skeletor himself. But before he can attack, Evil Lyn freezes him in place with magic. Skeletor threatens to kill Randa, and Adam's rage grows strong enough to shatter the spell. He fires a blast of energy at Skeletor, who dodges it as the blast hits the wall instead, shaking the entire cave and causing it to crumble. The ceiling collapses, burying Randa beneath the falling rock. Adam rushes to the debris and desperately pulls the broken stones away. He finds his father alive, but only barely. Randa apologizes for how harsh he was when Adam was a child, finally admitting the regret he's carried, then dies in Adam's arms. As Adam breaks down, Skeletor strikes him unconscious with his staff. When Adam wakes up, he's back in his normal human form, locked in a cell with the other Eternians. Marino is the two. Adam embraces his mother, but the reunion is painful because he has to tell her that Randa is gone. Meanwhile, Skeletor raises the Sword of Power and speaks the correct words, expecting it to transform him, but nothing happens. Furious, he grabs Evil Lyn by the throat and demands to know why the sword won't obey him. She explains there may be a way. If they place the sword on its original altar, she can perform a ritual to unlock its power. Skeletor wastes no time and immediately leads his forces toward Castle Grayskull. Back in the prison cell, Duncan and Adam speak honestly about the guilt they both carry and how much they feel they've failed. Adam remembers Duncan once taught him never to give up, no matter how hopeless things looked. Together they agree the fight isn't over. Then Tila interrupts with a surprise. Adam's tiger, Cringer, is alive and has been brought to the cell, and even more shocking, Cringer can now talk. Overjoyed, the tiger licks Adam's face, giving him the emotional push he needs. With his courage restored, Adam stands before the prisoners and delivers a heartfelt speech about standing together, reminding them of who they are and helping them remember that Eternia isn't finished yet. Slowly his words bring their hope back, convincing them they still have a reason to fight. The prisoners waste no time putting Adam's plan into motion. Together they push against the heavy gate while Roboto fires upward into the rock above it. After several blasts, the ceiling gives way and the collapsing stone breaks the barrier open. As the Eternians escape, they run straight into a squad of enemy soldiers, but this time the heroic warriors are ready. Using their unique powers, they tear through the attackers quickly and clear the path with almost no effort. Once the area is secure, they seize enemy ships and head back toward Eternos, determined to reclaim the city that was stolen from them. Before long the ruined capital becomes a battlefield again. The heroic warriors charge through the streets, clashing with Skeletor's forces in a fierce, unforgiving fight, with enemy after enemy falling as the defenders of Eternia push deeper into their beloved city. Meanwhile, Adam's team takes another ship toward Castle Grayskull. When they reach the bridge, Duncan tells Adam and Tila to continue inside while he stays behind to hold the entrance. Cringer is visibly terrified, but Adam speaks to him with confidence, reminding him that deep down he isn't just a scared tiger, he's a battle cat. Cringer finally accepts it and lets Adam ride him into the castle. Inside Castle Grayskull, Skeletor places the Sword of Power onto its ancient altar, preparing to unlock its power for himself. Just then the heroes burst into the chamber. Cringer immediately launches himself at the guards, knocking them aside and opening a path. Adam uses the moment to leap onto the altar and snatch the sword back, while Tila charges straight at Evil Lyn. Evil Lyn tries to stop her with a freezing spell, but Tila fights through it, breaks free, and keeps attacking without slowing down. Beastman also joins the fight and lashes his whip at Cringer, but Cringer bites down on the weapon and pulls hard, sending Beastman crashing down. Outside on the bridge, Duncan and Roboto hold their position, firing at every soldier who tries to cross. As enemy numbers keep growing, the two turn their weapons on a large statue and shoot it until it topples over, smashing onto the bridge and causing the whole structure to collapse, cutting off the attacking troops. Unfortunately the danger isn't over. A trapjaw appears in an aircraft and opens fire on Roboto, and the blasts steer into the robot until he explodes. Seeing this, Duncan is filled with rage. He leaps onto Trapjaw's aircraft, smashes through the front window, and tackles him inside, beating him savagely before forcing a grenade into Trapjaw's mouth and jumping out of the ship. Seconds later the aircraft crashes and erupts in a huge explosion. Duncan rushes back to Roboto's remains, fearing the worst, and feels relief when he sees Roboto's head is still functioning. Inside the castle, Adam is unable to transform because Skeletor keeps attacking relentlessly. Adam uses the sword to block wave after wave of magic, but the blade absorbs too many blasts and eventually shatters into pieces. Skeletor picks up the broken handle and mocks the legendary weapon, treating it as if it were never worthy of fear. He then grabs Adam by the head and burns him with dark magic, forcing him into a series of twisted hallucinations. Adam suddenly finds himself in a gym, where Skeletor appears and insults him for being weak, then throws a heavy weight at him, knocking him into another illusion. This time Adam is back at the restaurant from his failed date, except now the girl actually seems interested in his story until the moment turns horrifying and she transforms into Skeletor, who drags Adam through the room by his hair while attacking random people around them. The illusion shifts again, and Adam is thrown onto his office desk. His boss appears, casually reminding him about their meeting as if nothing strange is happening, and then Skeletor steps in wearing formal clothes, grabs Adam by the throat, and tells him he'll never be a hero. He says Eternia is nothing more than a fantasy Adam invented to imagine himself as something greater than he really is. Back in the real world, Skeletor stabs Adam with a broken piece of the sword, then throws him into another illusion, at this time inside his own room. Hassan checks on him and reminds him to pay the rent, only to suddenly die in front of him. Adam looks around at his old drawings and finds one of the sorceress. As papers begin swirling through the room, the same bird appears again. Then the bird speaks, revealing that it's been the sorceress all along. She tells Adam the sword itself was never the true source of the power. The words were never about the weapon. When the spell says "I have the power," it means the power now lives inside Adam. The sword had already transferred it to him. As a glow begins shining from his chest, the sorceress transforms and explains why she chose him as its vessel. It wasn't because he was the strongest or the most ruthless. She chose him because his kindness, compassion, and humanity would make him the hero Eternia truly needed. Adam awakens in the real world and pulls the broken piece of the sword from his chest. The power inside him heals the wound instantly, and the scattered fragments of the sword rise into the air and return to the handle, rebuilding the blade piece by piece. Adam speaks the magic words again and transforms with a surge of power so intense the light can be seen all the way from the city. Remembering what the sorceress told him, he doesn't attack immediately. Instead he tries to speak to Skeletor, asking him to stop this endless cycle of violence and destruction. Skeletor only laughs at the offer and strikes him with magic, beginning their final battle. As they fight, Skeletor continues mocking him, insisting Adam doesn't truly understand how to use the power he carries. But when Skeletor corners him, Adam's eyes begin to glow, and he tells Skeletor that he does know how to use it. He simply chooses not to abuse it. Then Adam finally unleashes himself, overpowering Skeletor with ease, landing blow after blow without even seeming strained. He throws him against a column, charges his fist with glowing energy, and continues beating him down, tossing him around like he weighs nothing. Watching her leader lose control of the fight, Evil Lyn quietly slips out of the castle. Skeletor fires more magic at Adam, but Adam blocks every blast with his bracelets. When Skeletor realizes he's losing, he suddenly claims he's willing to talk, but Adam grabs Skeletor's staff, fills it with power, and makes it explode. The blast creates a massive shockwave that spreads across the entire area, and Skeletor is destroyed in the explosion, leaving only his skull behind. With the battle finally over, Adam reunites with his friends, and together they leave Castle Grayskull. 6 months later, Eternos has almost been fully rebuilt. Marina has returned to the throne, guiding the kingdom into a new era. Roboto has been given a new body, and Hassan has been brought to Eternia as well, finally allowing him to see the truth behind Adam's impossible story. When Roboto receives a distress signal from a nearby village, Adam immediately answers the call, transforming once more and riding into action on Crindia, who now wears armor of his own. From this point on, Adam protects the people of Eternia under the heroic name He-Man. Meanwhile, Marina looks over her restored city with hope, still wishing that one day her other child will return home too. Near the forest, a princess appears carrying a sword that resembles Adam's. And somewhere inside the castle, Evil Lyn finds what remains of Skeletor and picks up his skull. So let's just get this out of the way first. Masters of the Universe is not some flawless fantasy epic. It's not the kind of movie where every scene clicks perfectly into place, every joke lands, every emotional beat hits, and you walk out thinking, wow, cinema has been changed forever. No, not even close. This thing is messy. It's loud. It's sometimes ridiculous in ways that feel intentional, and sometimes ridiculous in ways that probably weren't. There are moments where you can feel the movie trying a little too hard to be funny, trying too hard to be modern, trying too hard to make sure every kind of viewer has something to grab onto. And because of that, yeah, it stumbles quite a bit. But here's the annoying part. I still had fun. And not fake fun. Not, well, at least I survived it. Fun, I mean actual smiling at the screen, dumb but going with it fun. There's a certain energy to this movie that makes it hard to fully dismiss, even when the writing gets clunky or the tone starts wobbling all over the place. It knows it's built on a franchise where a guy literally becomes He-Man by raising a magic sword, so it doesn't approach the material with too much seriousness, and honestly, that's probably the right call. The movie works best when it just embraces what it is, a big, colorful, slightly chaotic fantasy adventure made for people who either grew up with the toys and cartoons or are walking into this universe for the first time and just want a wild blockbuster ride. When it leans into that sense of fun, it has real charm. You can feel the nostalgia baked into the whole thing, not just as cheap references but as that very specific childhood feeling of opening a toy box and imagining an entire universe from plastic figures, castles, monsters, swords, villains, and impossible names. That's where the movie earns a lot of goodwill, because even when it's flawed, it doesn't feel cold. It doesn't feel like a completely empty cash grab. There's affection here, there's energy here, and there are scenes where you can tell the people involved understood that Masters of the Universe was never supposed to be grounded, subtle, or overly serious. It was always strange. It was always exaggerated. It was always a little silly. So when this movie goes big, bright, and shamelessly goofy, it feels closer to the spirit of the franchise than a darker, more self-conscious version probably would have. But that doesn't excuse everything. The movie has real problems. The pacing is uneven. Some scenes feel like they could have been trimmed. Some jokes arrive at the worst possible moment, right when the movie should be letting a scene breathe. The story itself is pretty familiar, and if you've seen enough superhero origins, fantasy rebellions, or modern franchise reboots, you'll recognize the shape of it almost immediately. There aren't many surprises in the structure. It's very much a modern studio blockbuster with all the good and bad that comes with that. And yet, somehow, that formula doesn't completely ruin it. Part of that is because the movie has personality, a not always controlled personality, sure, but personality. It's not afraid to be campy, not afraid to look colorful, not afraid to have characters with names that sound like they came straight off a kid's toy shelf, because, well, they did. Instead of pretending that isn't weird, the movie often just smiles at it and keeps moving. For longtime fans, that will probably be enough to carry them through a lot of the rough patches. If you grew up with this world, there's a good chance the nostalgia will hit harder than the flaws. Seeing these characters brought to life, seeing it near on a big screen, hearing the music swell, watching the sword come out, how those moments carry a certain power. Maybe not perfect filmmaking power, but emotional fan power, and sometimes, for a movie like this, that matters. For everyone else, it may come down to how much patience you have for a film that's very clearly having fun with itself. If you need tight logic, subtle storytelling, and emotional depth in every scene, this probably isn't your thing. But if you're willing to meet it halfway, to accept the silliness, the camp, the occasional awkward joke, and the fact that this movie is basically throwing a giant fantasy toy box at the screen, there's a good time to be had here. That's why my overall feeling is kind of split, but not in a negative way. As a critic, I can see the cracks everywhere. The movie is too uneven to call great. It's too familiar to call fresh. It's too messy to call fully successful. But as a viewer, especially one watching a movie that clearly wants to entertain first and explain itself later, I can't pretend I was bored. I wasn't. I was actually enjoying myself more often than I expected. So the best way I can describe Masters of the Universe is this: it's a flawed fantasy blockbuster with a big nostalgic heart. It's clumsy, overstuffed, sometimes cheesy, and definitely not as polished as it thinks it is. But it's also colorful, energetic, sincere in its own strange way, and just fun enough to make the flaws feel less damaging than they probably should. Is it a masterpiece? Absolutely not. Is it better than a movie about He-Man stranded between Earth and Eternia had any right to be? Honestly, yeah, kind of. The basic setup here is pretty simple, and honestly, that's not a bad thing for this kind of movie. Masters of the Universe doesn't try to bury you under a mountain of lore right away. It knows there are people walking in who grew up with He-Man, the toys, the cartoons, the whole thing, and there are people who probably only know the name because they've heard it somewhere. So the movie starts with a very clean fantasy premise. Prince Adam is taken from Eternia, separated from his family and his destiny, and ends up on Earth with almost no real connection to the life he was supposed to have. And I'll give the movie this A. As silly as that sounds on paper, it's a smart way to restart the franchise. Instead of opening with Adam already standing around as a fully formed, all-powerful hero, the film gives him a gap, a missing piece. He's not walking into the story as the legendary warrior everyone already knows. He's someone who's been displaced, living a strangely ordinary Earth life while carrying the weight of something much bigger, even if he doesn't fully understand it yet. There's something funny, maybe even slightly ridiculous, about seeing Prince Adam of Eternia dropped into such a normal setting, a guy connected to castles, sorcery, cosmic power, and ancient evil, now stuck in a modern human routine. It's the kind of contrast that could have completely derailed the movie if it had stayed there too long, but as an origin point, it works. It gives Adam somewhere to start before the movie throws him back into the world he was born to protect. The sword of power becomes the main object driving that return. Adam needs it not just because it's a cool fantasy weapon, but because it's tied to his identity, tied to Eternia, tied to the power he's supposed to inherit. And of course, Skeletor wants that same power for himself. Because what else is Skeletor going to do as sit down and have a calm conversation about political reform? The man has a skull for a face. He's here to conquer. So the movie quickly builds its conflict around that classic fantasy idea, a lost prince, a stolen or missing source of power, a kingdom in danger, and a villain trying to unlock something far beyond his control. None of that is new. We've seen pieces of this structure in superhero movies, fantasy adventures, and big franchise reboots for years. But again, originality isn't really the main thing this movie is chasing. It's chasing that old school heroic feeling, at the idea that someone ordinary, or at least someone made to feel ordinary, can step into something impossible. That's where Adam's journey becomes more interesting than just find sword, become strong, fight villain. What the movie is really setting up is a hero who has to grow into the image everyone expects from him. Adam isn't instantly ready. He isn't immediately the perfect warrior. He has the bloodline, he has the legacy, and eventually he has the power, but he still has to learn what that power is actually for. That matters, because if the movie had only treated He-Man as muscles and poses, it would have felt empty very quickly. The premise works best when it treats Adam as someone caught between two versions of himself. On Earth, he's been shaped by normal human life. On Eternia, he's expected to become a symbol. And the fun of the story comes from watching those two sides collide. He isn't just returning home, he's returning to a home that has changed, a home that has suffered, a home where Skeletor has already done real damage. That gives the story a bit more weight, even if the movie doesn't always handle that weight perfectly. When Adam finally gets pulled back toward Eternia, the film starts to feel more like the Masters of the Universe movie people probably came to see. You get the fantasy setting, the strange allies, the colorful villains, the old mythic language about destiny and power. But underneath all of that, the premise is still built around a very basic emotional idea. Adam has to stop running from who he is, or maybe more accurately, he has to figure out who he is before the world around him collapses completely. There's also a nice simplicity in how the movie frames Skeletor. He isn't some quiet, grounded, morally complicated villain who needs a 15-minute speech explaining his trauma. He's evil, theatrical, hungry for power, and perfectly suited to this universe. That works for the premise, because Masters of the Universe isn't asking for a subtle villain, it needs a big fantasy threat, and Skeletor fills that space immediately. Still, the origin story isn't without problems. There are areas where the writing rushes past details that could have made Adam's Earth life feel more complete. His years away from Eternia are important, but the movie doesn't always stop to make that part feel fully lived in. You understand the function of Earth in the story, but you don't always feel the full emotional weight of him growing up there. Some details are skipped, some things are brushed over, and the movie seems more excited to get him back to Eternia than to really explore what being separated from his home has done to him. And maybe that's fair. Maybe most people buying a ticket for this movie don't want a deep psychological drama about Prince Adam's lost childhood. They want the sword, the transformation, the villain, the castle, the battle. I get that. But still, a little more emotional texture could have helped, because the ingredients are a lost prince, a captured family, a ruined kingdom, a magical sword, a villain taking over the world he was supposed to inherit. That's classic fantasy material, and the movie just sometimes treats it more like a launchpad for action and jokes than a story with real emotional consequences. But even with those issues, the premise does its job. It gets Adam from Earth back to Eternia. It gives him a reason to become He-Man. It gives Skeletor a clear threat. It gives the audience a simple doorway into a world that could easily have become confusing if the movie had overloaded it too early. And most importantly, it lets the film build Adam as a hero who has to earn the title, not just wear the costume. So as an origin story, it's not groundbreaking. It's not especially complex. It borrows from a lot of familiar fantasy and superhero patterns, but for Masters of the Universe, that simple structure mostly works. It gives the movie enough shape to move forward, enough nostalgia for old fans, and enough clarity for anyone new to the franchise. And honestly, for a story about a prince from Eternia reclaiming a magic sword to fight a skull-faced villain for the fate of the universe, clear and fun might be exactly the right place to start. One of the trickiest things this movie has to deal with is the Earth material. And honestly, I get why the choice makes people nervous. Anytime a fantasy franchise takes these huge, strange, colorful worlds and drops the story onto regular old Earth, there's always the fear the movie is going to cheap out. That instead of castles, monsters, magic, armies, and impossible land escapes, we're suddenly watching people run around parking lots, offices, gas stations, or city streets because that's easier to film. With Masters of the Universe, that worry is even stronger, because fans aren't really showing up to watch Prince Adam deal with normal human life. They want Eternia. They want Castle Grayskull. They want the weird creatures, the villains, the bright fantasy madness, the kind of world that looks like it was built from a kid's imagination and a box full of action figures. So when the movie starts on Earth, there's a small moment where you think, okay, how much of this are we doing? Thankfully, the film doesn't completely trap itself there. The Earth section has a purpose that gives Adam a more ordinary starting point and lets the movie play with the contrast between who he appears to be and who he actually is. There's something naturally funny about this larger-than-life fantasy hero being stuck in a modern human setting, acting like a normal person, while this huge destiny waits for him somewhere far away. That contrast gives the opening a little spark. But it also comes with a limit. Earth works best when the movie uses it as a setup, not as the main attraction. For the most part, the film seems to understand that. It spends enough time there to establish Adam's situation, his disconnect from Eternia, and the whole search for the Sword of Power, but it doesn't let the Earth storyline swallow the entire movie. That's important, because the longer the film stays away from Eternia, the more it starts to feel like it's delaying the thing everyone came to see. There are definitely moments where the Earth material feels a bit awkward. Some of the modern jokes and references make the movie feel less timeless, and every now and then you can feel the fantasy energy being pulled down by the everyday setting. It's not always terrible, but it's noticeable. The movie is at its most exciting when it's weird, colorful, and fully committed to its own universe. Earth, by comparison, can feel a little plain, and once Adam gets back to Eternia, the movie immediately feels more alive. That's where the whole thing starts breathing properly. The visuals get bigger, the mythology comes into focus, and the adventure finally feels like Masters of the Universe instead of a superhero origin movie borrowing fantasy clothes. Eternia gives the film its identity. It gives the story scale. It gives the characters a world that matches their names, costumes, powers, and dramatic speeches. Because, let's be honest, characters like Skeletor, Man-at-Arms, Teela, Beast-Man, Ram-Man, and Trapjaw simply make more sense in Eternia. On Earth, those names and designs can feel like a joke waiting to happen. In Eternia, they belong. The whole universe is already strange enough to support them. That's why the movie improves once it fully embraces the fantasy side. The stakes feel clearer once you see the damage Skeletor has done to Adam's home. The hero's journey feels stronger when Adam isn't just trying to understand himself but trying to return to a world that actually needs him. And the action carries more personality when it's happening in a place filled with strange technology, magic, warriors, creatures, and massive fantasy landscapes. Still, the Earth setup isn't useless. It gives Adam a bridge between the audience and the craziness of Eternia. For newer viewers, that helps say instead of throwing everyone into the deep end right away, the movie lets Adam be the person who's also trying to reconnect with this world. He isn't fully comfortable either, so the audience gets to discover some of it alongside him. But if I'm being honest, the movie could probably have trimmed some of the Earth material and lost nothing major, not because it's all bad, but because the real energy clearly lives in Eternia. Every time the movie gets back to the fantasy world, it feels more confident. Every time it slows down on Earth or leans into modern comedy, it risks feeling like a more generic blockbuster. The balance mostly works, but you can feel the tug of war. It's almost like the film knows Eternia is the heart of the story but still thinks it needs Earth to make the whole thing more relatable. And maybe it does, to a point. But with a franchise this strange, relatability isn't always the most important thing. Sometimes the best move is to let the weirdness be the selling point. That's where the movie is at its strongest, not when it's trying to make He-Man fit into our world, but when it lets us step into his. This is the part where the movie probably wins over a lot of people before their critical brain even has time to complain, because Masters of the Universe is absolutely loaded with nostalgia. Not just the lazy kind, where a movie points at something old and expects applause, although there's some of that too, but the stronger kind, the kind where a color choice, a costume detail, a character pose, or a tiny background reference suddenly takes you back to being a kid sitting too close to the TV, watching this completely absurd universe like it was the most important mythology ever created. For a lot of fans, that feeling is going to do heavy lifting. The movie clearly understands that He-Man was never just about story, it was about the whole texture of the thing. The sword, the transformation, the heroic poses, the strange names, villains who looked like they were designed by a child, and a heavy metal album cover at the same time. The castles, the monsters, the colorful armor, the ridiculous confidence of it all. That toy box imagination is the franchise's soul, and this movie knows it. You can feel that affection in the way it brings the characters to life. It isn't trying to sand everything down into something too grounded or embarrassed, thank goodness. Because the worst version of this movie would have been one that kept apologizing for being Masters of the Universe. This version, for all its flaws, doesn't seem ashamed of the material. It knows the names are silly. It knows the costumes are loud. It knows a skull-faced villain shouting dramatic threats isn't exactly subtle cinema. But instead of running away from that, it leans in. That's why so many of the fan service moments land. You get visual callbacks to the cartoon, little costume details pulled from the old designs and updated just enough to work in live action, characters standing, moving, laughing, or transforming in ways that clearly echo the animated series. Even Adam's Earth clothes carrying those familiar colors is the kind of small detail that feels like someone in the production actually cared. And then, of course, there's the transformation. A He-Man movie lives or dies a little bit on that moment. You can have all the CGI battles you want, all the speeches about destiny, all the shiny fantasy landscapes, but if the sword goes up and the transformation feels flat, something essential is missing. The movie understands the ritual of it. It treats that moment like a memory being rebuilt on the bigger screen. It isn't just a power-up, it's the thing fans have been waiting to see. The same goes for the world itself. A Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, Eternia's bright fantasy landscapes. All of that has to feel slightly unreal, because the original world was slightly unreal. It came from cartoons, comics, and toys. So when the movie recreates that with big colors, exaggerated shapes, and a very direct sense of fantasy, it feels right. Maybe not always perfect, maybe sometimes too digital, but the intention is there. And that intention matters. There are also plenty of little nods scattered throughout the film for people who know the franchise well. Some obvious, some tucked into the background, some built into jokes, some just there in how a character is designed or introduced. It gives the movie a rewatch quality for fans, since you can imagine people going back just to catch the references they missed the first time. But here's the thing. Fan service can be dangerous. When a movie relies too much on nostalgia, it can start feeling like a checklist. A character appears, audience claps, old line repeated, audience claps again, reference, cameo, callback, repeat. And while Masters of the Universe definitely gets close to that at times, it mostly avoids feeling completely hollow, because the nostalgia is tied to real affection for the material. It doesn't always use that affection gracefully, but it has it. The movie seems to know that for many viewers, this franchise isn't just another piece of IP, it's childhood. It's action figures lined up on the floor. It's Saturday morning energy. It's that old feeling of inventing battles between heroes and villains before you even fully understood what storytelling was. And when the movie taps into that, it becomes harder to be cold toward it. Even some of the sillier references work, because the franchise itself was silly. The character names, the heroic poses, the over-the-top villain that isn't a flaw the movie accidentally inherited. It's part of the DNA. So when the film makes little jokes about those things or lightly acknowledges how weird they are, it can feel playful instead of disrespectful. Not always, though. There are moments where the self-awareness goes a bit too far and the movie starts poking at the material when it should just trust it. That's the risk with modern nostalgia movies. They want to honor the old thing but also want to wink at the audience so nobody thinks they're taking it too seriously. Sometimes that wink is funny, sometimes it undercuts the magic. Masters of the Universe does both. When it respects the cartoon's spirit, it works beautifully. When it turns every odd detail into a joke, it starts to feel like the movie is slightly afraid of its own source material. Not fully afraid, but enough that you notice. The best scenes are the ones where the film says, yes, this is ridiculous, and we're doing it anyway. The weaker scenes are the ones where it says, yes, this is ridiculous, please laugh so we can move on. There's a difference. Still, as a piece of nostalgic adaptation, the movie gets more right than wrong. It understands the broad shape of the franchise. It understands the appeal of these characters. It understands that Eternia should feel colorful and strange, not gray and realistic. And most importantly, it understands that old fans don't just want references, they want the feeling behind those references. That's why the nostalgia hits. Not because every callback is genius, not because every design is perfect, not because the movie somehow recreates childhood exactly. It can't do that. No movie can. But it gets close enough in certain moments that you feel the old excitement flicker back for a second. And for a movie like this, that flicker is a big deal, because underneath all the CGI, the jokes, the messy pacing, and the modern blockbuster noise, Masters of the Universe still feels like it remembers what made kids care in the first place. The world is huge. The heroes are bold. The villains are ridiculous. The sword matters. The transformation matters. The names matter, even when they're absurd. And for longtime fans, that might be the difference between a movie that's merely okay and one they can't help but love. What surprised me a little about Masters of the Universe is that it doesn't completely lock itself behind nostalgia. Now, make no mistake, this is absolutely a movie built with old fans in mind. You can feel that everywhere, in the references, the designs, the little jokes, the legacy touches, all clearly aimed at people who already have some emotional connection to He-Man. But the movie also seems aware that not everyone walking into the theater knows the difference between Man-at-Arms, Ram-Man, Mechanic, Trap-Jaw, or any of these names that sound like someone invented them 5 seconds before selling an action figure. And honestly, that's a smart move, because this franchise is old enough now that a new movie can't just assume everyone carries the same childhood memories. Some people grew up with the cartoon, some had the toys, some only know He-Man from memes, clips, or that one transformation pose they've seen online, and some are coming in with almost no background at all, just looking for a loud fantasy adventure with a skull-faced villain and a magic sword. The film tries to make space for both groups. That's probably why the story is so clean and straightforward. It doesn't throw you into the deepest corners of the mythology right away, and it doesn't expect you to have studied the franchise like homework. It gives you the basic emotional and narrative pieces first. Adam was separated from his home. Eternia is in danger. Skeletor is the villain. The sword matters, and Adam has to become the hero he was always meant to be. Simple A may be too simple in places A, but useful. For newer viewers, that simplicity keeps the movie from becoming overwhelming. There are a lot of characters here, a lot of weird names, a lot of fantasy language being thrown around. If the plot had also been dense and complicated, the whole thing could have collapsed under its own mythology. Instead, the movie gives you a familiar structure and lets the world provide the weirdness. That's not a bad strategy. A reboot like this has to walk a very narrow line. If it only serves old fans, it risks becoming a museum piece, a fun for people who already care, but confusing or empty for everyone else. But if it ignores old fans and tries too hard to modernize everything, it loses the very thing that made the franchise worth reviving in the first place. This movie doesn't always balance that perfectly, but you can see the attempt. It wants to be a modern summer blockbuster, a big screen action, quick jokes, a fast pace, colorful effects, a post-credits tease, franchise launching energy. At the same time, it wants to preserve the old-school fantasy charm of Masters of the Universe. That combination isn't easy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it feels like two different movies pulling on the same sword. But when it works, there's a real sense that this could introduce the world to a new audience without completely alienating the people who kept it alive. The movie's strongest modern choice is probably making Adam feel more approachable. He isn't presented as a perfect, impossible hero from frame 1A. He has uncertainty, he has awkwardness, he has to grow into the role. That makes him easier for new viewers to follow, because they're learning the world alongside him. He isn't simply explaining it in ear to the audience, he's rediscovering it himself. That helps. The film also understands that modern audiences usually need more than just strong hero beats evil villain, so it tries to give Adam a little more emotional shape. His power isn't only about muscle, it's also about compassion, teamwork, and learning when strength should be used. Whether the movie handles that perfectly is another question, but the idea is there, and it gives this version of He-Man a slightly more current feel without completely betraying the cartoon's spirit. At the same time, this modern approach is also where some of the movie's problems come from. The constant jokes, the self-aware tone, the little bits of adult humor, the feeling that it sometimes wants to be an MCU-style adventure, all of that can make the film feel less timeless. It's trying so hard to speak the language of today's blockbusters that certain moments already feel like they belong to a specific trend. And that's risky, because Masters of the Universe is at its best when it feels mythic, strange, and a little outside normal reality. The modern stuff can help bring people in, but it can also water down the fantasy. There are times when the movie seems too eager to reassure the audience that it knows this is silly. For new viewers, that may actually make the world easier to accept. But for viewers who want the film to fully believe in it, the winking can get in the way. You can update a franchise without constantly elbowing the audience in the ribs. Still, I do think the movie deserves credit for not becoming completely trapped in lore. It's accessible. It's easy to follow. You don't need to know every previous version of He-Man to understand what's going on. You don't need a timeline breakdown, a cartoon refresher, or a toy catalog beside you. The movie gives you enough to understand the conflict, the characters, and the emotional direction of the story. And for a franchise as strange as this one, that's actually important, because if Masters of the Universe is going to survive as a modern film series, it can't only be for people who were already fans 40 years ago. It has to make a case for itself now. It has to show new viewers why this world is fun, why these characters matter, and why a story this ridiculous can still have charm. Does the movie fully prove that? Maybe not completely, but it gets closer than I expected. It has enough nostalgia for the old crowd, enough clarity for newcomers, and enough blockbuster energy to feel like it's trying to restart the franchise rather than just replay it. It doesn't always know exactly what kind of movie it wants to be, but it does know that Masters of the Universe needs to feel big, colorful, and welcoming. And that's probably the best thing about this revival. It doesn't ask you to be an expert, it just asks you to accept the weirdness, follow the sword, and enjoy the ride. The tone of Masters of the Universe is probably going to decide whether you're having a great time with this movie or quietly checking out halfway through. This isn't a film trying to be serious fantasy in the traditional sense. It's not aiming for that heavy, grounded, ancient myth mood where everyone whispers about destiny under gray skies. This movie is loud. It's colorful. It's goofy. It has characters with names that sound completely insane if you say them out loud in normal conversation. And to its credit, the film seems to understand that that might be one of the reasons it works as often as it does. There's a real campiness here, and a lot of it feels intentional. The performances are big. The villain is theatrical. The heroic moments are almost proudly exaggerated. The movie doesn't look at He-Man and try to turn him into a gritty, tortured warrior who spends half the runtime brooding in a dark room. It lets him exist in a world where magic swords, skull-faced villains, strange warriors, wild armor, and cartoon logic are simply part of the deal. And honestly, for this franchise, that's probably the right direction. The old cartoon was never subtle. It had a strange charm because it took these completely ridiculous ideas and presented them with total confidence. A man named He-Man, a villain named Skeletor, warriors called Ram-Man, Fisto, Moshinik, Trapjaw. That's not material you can fully modernize by pretending it's normal. You either embrace the weirdness or the whole thing becomes awkward. This movie usually chooses to embrace it. When it leans into that campy toy box energy, it becomes genuinely fun. You can feel the actors playing into the heightened reality of the world. Jared Leto's Skeletor is probably the clearest example. He isn't quiet or restrained. He's dramatic, strange, sometimes funny, sometimes menacing, and clearly aware that a character like Skeletor shouldn't feel like a regular villain in a regular movie. He should feel like someone who walked out of a fantasy nightmare designed for Saturday morning television. That kind of performance helps define the movie's personality. Nicholas Galitzine also seems to understand the assignment. He gives Adam enough sincerity that the character doesn't become a joke, but he isn't afraid of the silliness either. That balance matters, because if the lead actor played everything too straight, the film's campier elements would look even stranger around him. Instead, he fits the tone pretty naturally, allowing the movie to be heartfelt and ridiculous at the same time. But that's also where the problems start, because the movie doesn't always know when to stop. There are moments where the silliness feels charming, and then there are moments where it starts stepping on the story's own feet. A little self-awareness can be fun. It can make the audience feel like the movie is in on the joke without mocking the thing they came to see. But too much self-awareness starts to break the spell. Instead of letting the fantasy breathe, the film sometimes keeps nudging you, almost as if to say, "Don't worry, we know this is dumb." After a while, that gets tiring. The best parts of Masters of the Universe are not the parts where it apologizes for being weird. They're the parts where it fully commits, when the movie lets Eternia be strange, lets the heroes look heroic, lets Skeletor be theatrical, lets the sword and the transformation feel important. That's when the tone clicks, when the camp feels like a strength. But when every serious moment gets a joke, or every odd detail needs a wink, the tone starts to wobble. You can especially feel this in scenes that should be building tension or emotional weight. Something important happens, and instead of sitting with it, the film often runs straight into a gag. Sometimes that gag lands, sometimes it absolutely doesn't, and even when it's funny, there's still a cost. The story loses a little gravity each time it refuses to let a moment matter. That's the big tonal tug of war here. On one side, you have this bright fantasy adventure that wants to feel like the cartoon brought to life. On the other, you have a modern studio comedy action movie reaching for quick laughs, self-aware lines, and familiar blockbuster rhythms. Those two approaches can work together, but they need control and timing, and this movie doesn't always have that timing. It's not that the film should have been serious all the way through. That would have been wrong too. A completely straight-faced Masters of the Universe movie could easily become unintentionally hilarious, maybe even more ridiculous than this version. The franchise needs humor, needs a sense of fun, needs that larger-than-life camp. The issue isn't the presence of comedy, it's the placement. There are scenes where the humor fits beautifully because the whole situation is already absurd. Character name jokes, exaggerated heroic behavior, little nods to the cartoon. Those work because they come from the DNA of the franchise. But when jokes appear during moments that should feel dangerous, emotional, or exciting, they start to flatten everything. Suddenly the movie isn't just campy, it's insecure. And that's frustrating, because there are times when it almost finds the perfect balance. Scenes where the film feels like it knows exactly what it is. A bright, old-school fantasy adventure with modern energy and a sense of humor about itself. In those moments it's easy to go along with it. You stop worrying about the logic, stop questioning the names, and just accept that this universe is strange and enjoy the ride. Then a few scenes later, the movie pushes the joke too far or shifts tone too suddenly, and you're reminded how unstable the whole thing can be. That inconsistency is what keeps the film from being truly great, because camp isn't an excuse for messiness. A campy movie can still be precise. It can still have emotional rhythm. It can still know when to be funny and when to pull back. Some of the best fantasy adventures understand that balance. They let the audience laugh, but they also let the world matter. Masters of the Universe gets close, but it doesn't always land there. Still, I'd rather have this version than one that drains all the color and weirdness out of the property. At least this movie has personality. At least it isn't embarrassed by the fact that it's dealing with a magical warrior, a cosmic sword, and a villain named Skeletor. The tone may be messy, but it isn't dull. And for a franchise like this, dull would be the bigger crime. So yes, the movie is campy, very campy, sometimes in the best way, sometimes in the most exhausting way. It's silly, self-aware, and uneven. It swings from charming to annoying, from playful to overdone, from nostalgic fun to modern joke machine. But when that campiness works, it really does give the movie its flavor. It reminds you that Masters of the Universe was never supposed to be polished into something normal. It was always supposed to be a little ridiculous. The movie just needed to trust that ridiculousness a bit more instead of constantly trying to comment on it. The humor in Masters of the Universe is easily one of the most divisive parts of the whole movie. And I don't just mean some jokes are funny and some aren't. That happens in every blockbuster. I mean the comedy here actually changes how the movie feels. It shapes the tone, the pacing, the emotional stakes, even the audience the film seems to be aiming for. At times the jokes make the movie more charming, at other times they make it feel like the film is fighting against itself. There are moments where the humor really does work. The character name jokes, for example, make sense. Let's be honest, this universe has names like Randman, Fisto, Mechanic, Trap Jaw, and Man-at-Arms. You can't put those names into a modern live-action movie and pretend nobody in the audience is going to notice how strange they sound. So when the film lightly pokes fun at that, it feels natural, like the movie is acknowledging the obvious without completely mocking the source material. That kind of humor fits. Same with the little callbacks to the cartoon's more ridiculous habits, like the heroic posing, the exaggerated laughing, or the way these characters carry themselves with total confidence even when everything around them is absurd. Those jokes feel connected to the DNA of the franchise. They come from affection. They remind you that Masters of the Universe was always a bit silly, even when it was trying to be epic. When the movie is playing in that space, the comedy has a nice energy to it. The problem is that it doesn't stop there. The film keeps reaching for jokes even when the moment doesn't need one. It has that very modern blockbuster habit where a serious beat starts building, the music swells, the scene seems ready to land emotionally, and then somebody makes a joke. Sometimes the joke is harmless, sometimes it gets a laugh, but after a while you start to feel the pattern. And it becomes frustrating, because the movie isn't letting its own story breathe. That's where the MCU comparison makes sense, not because every modern action movie with jokes is automatically copying Marvel, but because Masters of the Universe has that same rhythm in places. Big fantasy moment, quick joke, emotional tension, quick joke, villain threat, quick joke. A song kicks in, the scene starts to feel cool, and then the movie undercuts it with a cheap laugh. It's like the film is nervous that if it takes anything seriously for more than 30 seconds, the audience will turn on it. But that's not true. Audiences can accept sincerity, especially in a movie like this. Actually, sincerity might be the thing this franchise needs most. If you're already asking people to believe in it, Anya, the Sword of Power, Castle Grayskull, and Skeletor, you might as well commit. The more the movie believes in its own world, the easier it is for the audience to believe in it too. The constant jokes sometimes weaken that belief. And then there's the adult humor, which creates another problem entirely. The film has a strange mix of childlike fantasy and more mature jokes, sex jokes, innuendo, some cursing, humor that feels aimed more at adults who grew up with the franchise than at kids discovering it for the first time. On one hand, I understand why that's the original fans are grown now, and a lot of the nostalgia is aimed at people who owned the toys decades ago. Not necessarily at children walking in fresh. But the movie still looks and moves like something that wants younger viewers too. That's where the target audience starts to feel unclear. Is this supposed to be a family-friendly fantasy adventure? A nostalgic comedy for adults? A superhero-style summer blockbuster? A sincere He-Man origin story? A self-aware parody of the cartoon? The answer seems to be Yes, all of that, all at once. And that's a hard balance to hold, because when the movie is bright, colorful, and toy-like, it feels made for kids and fans. When it throws in more adult jokes, it feels like it's winking at the older crowd. When it leans into action, it wants to be a crowd-pleasing blockbuster. When it gets self-deprecating, it feels like it's trying to avoid being laughed at by laughing first. None of these choices are automatically wrong. The issue is they don't always blend smoothly. There are jokes that feel like they belong in the movie, and then there are jokes that feel like they were added because someone was afraid a scene was becoming too sincere. And the difference is obvious. One kind of humor adds personality, the other drains tension. You can see this most clearly in the serious moments. The movie sets up danger. Tanya is under threat. Adam has to become something more than he is. People are depending on him. Skeletor isn't just making noise. He's supposed to be a real threat. But when jokes keep interrupting that, the stakes start to feel lighter than they should. It's not that Masters of the Universe needs to be dark. That would probably be worse. This should be a fun movie. It should have jokes. It should have a little ridiculousness. It should let the audience laugh at the weirdness of this universe. But there's a difference between being fun and being unable to stop joking. Sometimes the film crosses that line. And yet, I can't say the comedy completely fails. There are laughs here. Some of the banter works. Some of the self-aware moments are genuinely amusing. The film has a playful personality, and that's part of why it's enjoyable despite its flaws. A completely humorless version of this story would probably feel stiff and awkward. The silliness gives it movement. But I wish the movie trusted itself more. I wish it trusted the adventure, trusted Adam's journey, trusted that viewers could enjoy a sincere He-Man moment without needing somebody to immediately puncture it. The best jokes in the movie are the ones that come naturally from the world. The weakest ones feel like modern blockbuster reflexes. That's why the humor becomes both a strength and a problem. It helps the movie feel light, accessible, and playful, but it also makes the tone messy, blurs the audience target, and undercuts moments that needed more weight. For some viewers, that comedy will be part of the charm. For others, it'll be the exact thing that keeps them from fully connecting. For me, it landed somewhere in the middle. I liked the movie's willingness to be funny. I liked that it understood how weird this franchise is. And I liked the jokes rooted in the cartoon and the characters. A lot of the time, they are. The sword fights are where the movie feels especially alive. There's a clean, dynamic quality to the movement that makes those scenes more exciting than I expected. You can actually follow what's happening, which shouldn't feel rare, but in modern blockbusters, it sometimes does. The camera isn't constantly shaking itself to death. The editing isn't chopping every movement into tiny, unreadable pieces. The film lets you see the swings, the hits, the blocks, the movement through space. That makes a big difference, because when action is clear, it gives the audience permission to cheer. You can feel the rhythm of a fight, see when a character is gaining ground or losing it, and appreciate the choreography instead of just guessing what happened between flashes of motion and loud sound effects. Masters of the Universe is at its best when it remembers that spectacle doesn't need to be confusing to feel intense. Idris Elba's Duncan gets some of the strongest action moments, especially when he's thrown into fights that feel physical and heavy. His clashes with Trap Jaw have that fun, pulpy quality the movie needs. They're not trying to reinvent action cinema, but they give the film a nice muscular punch. Elba brings enough authority to those scenes that even when the armor looks a bit much, you still buy him as someone who can hold the line. And then there's Adam himself. Once the movie lets him step into the He-Man side of the role, the action becomes more satisfying. You want to feel that shift, and you want the transformation to mean something physically, not just visually. So when Adam starts moving with that extra force, when the fights begin to show his power, when he starts delivering those big heroic hits, the movie finally gives you that old wish fulfillment feeling. It's not subtle, but subtlety would be the wrong flavor here. There are moments where the action feels almost video game-like or toy commercial-like, but in a way that fits the property. Characters crash into each other, weapons fly, creatures charge, and the environments become playgrounds for big fantasy combat. Some of the finishing moves are surprisingly intense too, especially for a film that otherwise looks like it's trying to keep one foot in family adventure territory. It's not bloody exactly, but there are hits and takedowns with more force than I expected, and that gives the action a little edge. The chase sequences also help break things up. There's one stretch with a very clear space adventure flavor, almost as if the movie is borrowing from the same grand old tradition that inspired a lot of fantasy sci-fi in the first place. You can feel hints of other franchises in there, sure, but the sequence still works because it gives the movie speed. It pulls the film away from dialogue and lets the world move, and that's something Masters of the Universe desperately needs at times. Whenever the script gets heavy with exposition or overdone jokes, the action usually snaps the movie back awake. It reminds you that this is meant to be a ride, a loud one, a bright one, a slightly chaotic one, but a ride. The action doesn't fix every storytelling problem, but it keeps the film from becoming dull, and that matters more than people might admit. There are movies where you can feel the action is only there because the genre requires it. Here, the action feels connected to the appeal of the franchise. These characters were made for battles, they were designed to be smashed into each other in a kid's imagination. The film seems to understand that the fights should carry that playful, exaggerated, almost childlike excitement. It's violence filtered through fantasy spectacle, and that's why the big screen experience helps so much. This is absolutely the kind of movie that benefits from scale. Watching it small would probably make the flaws louder, or the jokes would feel more awkward, the CGI issues would be easier to pick apart, the story's simplicity might feel thinner. But in a theater, with the sound booming and the score pushing everything forward, the movie becomes easy to surrender to. That doesn't mean it becomes better written, it just becomes more enjoyable. There's a difference, but it's an important one. Idris Elba brings a completely different kind of energy as Duncan, or Man-at-Arms. He's basically the grounding force whenever the movie starts floating away into jokes, CGI, and fantasy chaos. Elba gives it a bit of weight. He has that natural authority where you don't need much explanation to believe people would follow him into battle. He's good here, maybe too good for some of the material. Honestly, there are moments where you look at him in that chunky armor and think, this man is doing everything he can to make this work. And he does. His action scenes have impact. His presence helps steady the group dynamic, and he gives Duncan a veteran warrior quality that the movie definitely needs. James Purefoy as King Randa also brings a nice theatrical seriousness. He treats the role with respect, which helps. A lesser version of the movie could have made Randa feel like just another fantasy parent figure who exists to explain destiny and then disappear from the plot, but Purefoy gives him a little dignity, a little gravitas. He understands the royal fantasy tone and plays it with enough weight that Adam's connection to his father has some real foundation. Kamala Mendes as Tila is more mixed, but mostly fine. Some scenes work well. She has the right kind of confidence for the role, and she fits the adventure tone better as the movie goes along. There are moments where she feels believable as someone who knows this world, knows the stakes, and knows Adam isn't quite ready for what's coming. But there are also moments where the performance feels a bit forced, especially when the writing pushes her into sharper or more awkward dialogue. Still, I wouldn't call her a major problem. She holds her place in the cast, and when the action and character dynamics are moving, she works. The issue is less her presence and more that the script doesn't always give her the strongest material. Tila should feel essential, not just functional, and the movie gets the sometimes, but not always. Marissa Baccarino as the sorceress brings a more graceful presence. She has the kind of calm, mysterious energy that fits the fantasy side of the movie. Even when the film is rushing through mythology or jumping between tones, she gives her scenes a little more weight. The sorceress needs to feel connected to something older and more spiritual in this world, and Baccarina helps sell that. She makes the fantasy feel slightly less noisy, slightly more mythic. And then we get to Alison Brie as Evil Lynn. This is probably the casting choice that stands out the most, and not in the best way. Brie is talented. She's done great work elsewhere, but here, something just doesn't fully click. Evil Lynn needs a certain eerie presence, a darker edge, maybe even a little creepy stillness, and Brie's energy doesn't always match that. Sometimes she feels like she belongs to a different version of the movie. Part of that might be the writing, and the role itself may not be shaped strongly enough, and it's hard to know how much of the issue is performance versus how Evil Lynn is written and directed. Either way, she ends up being one of the weaker pieces of the ensemble. Every time the movie should be making her feel dangerous or magnetic, the effect is a little softer than it should be. That matters, because the villains need power. A Skeletor can carry a lot on his own, but Evil Lynn should be more than just another figure beside him. She should have presence, add tension, feel like someone who could shift the mood of a scene just by entering it. Here, she doesn't always have that effect. The supporting cast has fun with the material, though. A lot of the smaller roles benefit from the film's campy energy. Characters like Randman, Fisto, Trap Jaw, Beastman, Mossman, Mechanic, Triclops, and the rest aren't all given equal depth, but many of them bring the toy shelf excitement the movie is clearly aiming for. Some are there for action, some for jokes, some simply because fans want to see them brought to life, and that's fine as long as the movie doesn't pretend every single one is deeply developed. The danger is that there are a lot of characters. At times the movie feels like it's trying to give everyone a moment, which can make the ensemble feel crowded. Some characters pop, some barely register, and some feel included more for recognition than storytelling. But even that has a certain charm if you're watching as a fan. A part of the fun is just seeing these bizarre characters exist in live action at all. And, of course, the Dolph Lundgren cameo is a major nostalgic highlight. It's not a huge role, but it doesn't need to be. The movie uses him as a respectful nod to the 1987 film, and for longtime fans, that moment has real sweetness to it. It feels like the old version passing the sword, or at least acknowledging that this franchise has a strange live-action history people still remember. The Good Journey touch lands because it's simple, sincere, and not overplayed. That's how nostalgia should be used. Not every performance in Masters of the Universe is perfect. Some are stronger than others. Some characters are better designed than written. Some actors are clearly elevating material that doesn't always give them much support. But the cast overall brings enough energy and commitment to keep the movie alive, and that commitment matters, because with material this campy, the worst thing an actor can do is act like they're trapped in it. Most of this cast does the opposite. They step into the weirdness. They accept the names, the costumes, the fantasy dialogue, the big gestures. They make the movie feel like a world people actually believe in, even when that world is completely ridiculous. That's probably why the performances work more often than they fail. Galitzine gives the film a sincere hero. Leto gives it a theatrical villain. Elba gives it weight. Purifoy gives it class. Baccarina gives it mystique. Mendes gives it enough grounded adventure energy. Brie, unfortunately, feels like the weakest fit, but even that doesn't sink the film. In the end, the cast does what the script can't always do on its own. They make the movie feel alive. The strange thing about this new Masters of the Universe is that it's not just competing with modern blockbusters. It's also competing with memory. For some viewers, that memory is the cartoon. For others, it's the toys. And for a smaller but very specific group, it's that 1987 live-action movie with Dolph Lundgren. A film that has always existed in that weird space between disappointment, nostalgia, camp artifact, and cult curiosity. It was not exactly the grand He-Man movie fans dreamed of, but it still became part of the franchise's history. You can't really talk about a new live-action version without feeling the shadow of that old one somewhere in the background, and this movie knows that. It doesn't pretend the 1987 film never happened, it nods to it, borrows certain ideas from it, Adam being sent to Earth, the villain gaining the upper hand, the search for a powerful object that can get him back home. You can feel pieces of that earlier version being reworked here in a cleaner, larger, more modern way. The difference is that this new film has the resources, visual effects, and franchise awareness to finally make it a near feel like a real destination rather than something the movie has to avoid because the budget can't support it. That alone makes it feel like a stronger attempt. The 1987 movie had its charm. Sure, Adolf Lundgren looked the part, Frank Langella brought real theatrical menace to Skeletor, and there's a certain old-school fantasy weirdness to it that some people still enjoy. But as an adaptation of Masters of the Universe, it always felt limited. It was trying to bring a massive animated toy universe into live action without really being able to show that universe properly. This version feels more like the movie fans were imagining back then. Not perfect, definitely not perfect, but closer. It has the color. It has the characters. It has Castle Grayskull. It has Skeletor looking like Skeletor. It has the transformation, the sword, the big fantasy scale, and the sense that the filmmakers actually wanted to put the cartoon's strange identity on screen instead of hiding from it. That's why, for a lot of fans, this movie will probably feel like the better live-action adaptation almost by default. And then there's the Dolph Lundgren cameo. That moment could have been cheap, one of those empty legacy appearances where the movie just drags out an old face, waits for the audience to clap, and moves on. But surprisingly, it works, because it's handled with a little warmth. It doesn't stop the movie dead, and it doesn't over-explain itself. It just gives long-time viewers a small passing of the torch moment, a little wink to the old film, and that good journey line, which carries more nostalgic weight than it probably should. Sometimes that's all a cameo needs to do, acknowledge the past without letting the past take over. That's important, because this movie clearly isn't trying to be a one-off nostalgia exercise. You can feel the franchise building within it. The credits scenes make that obvious. The movie is leaving doors open, teasing future stories, hinting that this universe has more characters, more conflicts, and more corners still waiting to be explored. Whether that excites you or makes you tired probably depends on how much goodwill the movie earned from you by the end. For some viewers, the answer will be simple: yes, bring on the sequel. If the film connected with your childhood memories, if the action worked for you, if it near felt alive, if the campiness made you smile more than it annoyed you, then the idea of seeing more from this world is genuinely appealing. There are so many characters the movie could still bring in, so much mythology it could expand, so many fan-favorite designs that could show up later. You can feel the toy box potential stretching beyond this one story. And honestly, I understand that excitement. This is the kind of universe that almost naturally invites expansion. It's full of heroes, villains, monsters, strange locations, and dramatic fantasy mythology. A sequel could go bigger, weirder, darker in the right places, maybe even more emotionally focused if the filmmakers learn from this movie's mistakes. There's room to improve, room to sharpen the tone, trim the jokes, deepen the stakes, and still keep the colorful fun. But there's also another side to it. Some viewers may walk away feeling like one movie was enough. A fun ride, sure, a nostalgic blast maybe, but not necessarily something they need to follow through 5 more installments. That's fair too, because while the film sets up a future, it doesn't completely prove that the future is essential. It proves this world can work on screen. It doesn't yet prove it can sustain an entire modern franchise without repeating the same issues. That's the real question. Can Masters of the Universe become more than a nostalgia event? Because nostalgia can launch a movie, but it can't carry a whole series forever. The first time you see the sword, the transformation, Castle Grayskull, Skeletor, the old characters, the legacy cameo, all of that hits because it feels like a return. But the second movie would need to be more than another return. It would need to build. It would need stronger storytelling, better pacing, more confident emotion, and a clearer sense of its audience. The foundation is here, but the foundation is messy. That's why the future of this franchise feels both exciting and uncertain. On one hand, the movie shows that a modern He-Man film can be colorful, sincere, action-packed, and fun without turning the property into something ashamed of itself.